Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to episode 8 of the Music Mind podcast. Today my special guest is Nashville session musician veteran, a professional musician of over 50 years, the great Jimmy Heffernan. Jimmy is a master of the Slide Dobro. He's played at the Grand Ole Opry, he's appeared on The Tonight Show and Good Morning America, he's toured the world and recorded in some of the best studios in the industry. But most of all, he's a really sharing human being. He's devoting a lot of his efforts these days to passing on his knowledge on how to play this beautiful instrument. Enjoy with me my conversation with Jimmy Heffernan. Well, hi, Jimmy, and welcome to the Music Mind podcast. It's great to have you as my special guest for episode 8 today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, our audience have just heard your fantastic recording of an old jazz standard, Limehouse Blues, played on the resonator guitar, the slide resonator or slide dobro that you're holding. Yeah, that type of one. I've got mine behind me here. They're a fantastic instrument. And look, the instrument itself might be new to some of the audience of this podcast. Can you just talk briefly tell us about Limehouse Blues, that recording and that album? How did that, I think it was your first solo album, is that correct?
Yeah, it was. I was playing with Larry Sparks and the Lonesome Ramblers back in those days. I think it was around 1980. And I was getting a little attention as a dobro player, and it seemed like the right thing to do to put out a record to help myself along. Plus, when you work on material and stuff, you like to record it and get it out of the way so you can move on and play something else.
Yes.
So that was kind of the start of the record. Limehouse Blues in particular, I'd heard it in jazz, but I wanted more of a bluegrass thing, so I had heard Don Reno do it on the banjo.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so I figured it might work on the dobro, and you start going through a little bit by bit. And the nature of the dobro is that sometimes things that other instruments can play, they're virtually impossible on the dobro sometimes.
Yes.
At least if you try to do them exactly. Sometimes you have to dobroize something, to go over a passage that doesn't sound good, or it's too hard to play and sounds hard,
Yes. And I think, look, just on that, Limehouse Blues, I think was written in the 1920s, and there's some famous recordings Louis Armstrong on trumpet and Django Reinhardt on guitar. Like all the greats have played it. So I suppose congratulations, first of all, being game enough to try such an established standard in jazz. And for our listeners are a variety of players and singers and people just interested in the creative life. But can you talk through your process of selecting a tune that you want to work up an arrangement of? What do you look for in a tune that you think will sit well instrumentally?
That's a good question. For me anyway, it always starts out with liking the song very much, and secondarily, it usually goes to nobody's done it on the dobro before.
Right.
So liking it would be number one, and then a little added attraction would be nobody's done it on the dobro. And then the process is to to sit down piece by piece and see how it works out on the instrument. As I said before, if it's too difficult, it often sounds difficult. You mentioned Louis Armstrong and Django, and absolutely two of my favorites that I've learned tons from. Both those guys as well as many others. But some things fit real well on the instrument, some things do not. So yes. I can't say I've copied everything from them, but in particular, Louis Armstrong's phrasing and some of the way Django floats through things, I've been able to incorporate in what I do.
Yeah, it's interesting because your style is sort of unique, that you're prepared to use the dobro, and I totally agree with how you play. You're prepared to treat it more as a single note instrument than trying to battle head on the limitations of the open G tuning. I'm assuming you're using the GBD tuning as your primary tuning?
Yes.
Yeah. So that tuning obviously is very limited as far as complex chords go. But what I love in your playing is you deliberately don't go there, and you're happy to treat the dobro a bit like Louis Armstrong's trumpet, and you're quite happy to play it as a single note instrument with some added harmony notes. I think that's something that is a little unique in your playing.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it goes back to the point I made earlier. I mean, if it doesn't sound good or if it sounds difficult, I tend to shy away from it. But no, you're very much right. I mean, I try to play more like Louis Armstrong than, say, Bashful Brother Oswald, who played with Roy Acuff back in the 30s and 40s. It's mostly playing chords or pieces of chords.
Yes. So when you do an improvised solo, one thing is establishing the melody, and our audience have just heard you clearly establish the melody of Limehouse Blues. And then I think a number of other players, I think banjo and guitar, I think, do their improvised choruses before you come back in and do a solo on the dobro. How do you treat soloing on a song as opposed to actually playing the melody of the tune? What's your process there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had a teacher, a fellow I used to play with. His name is Win Fay. He played old time country music and bluegrass, and I was just a kid, and I'd be playing with him, and I'd be playing, on some kind of heartfelt song, and he had this big old hand, and it would come over and stop my hand on the dobro, and he would go, he whatever the tune would be, he would go, no, go do 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 do. He would sing the melody to me, and I was so young, and I thought, this guy doesn't know anything, this is stupid what he's trying to get me to do. But in fact, it wasn't. It's the way you should play. So the way I approach a solo, back to your question, is I try, and I don't always succeed. You can just take the chords and just put a scale over the top of them and alter your scale to follow the chords, and things of that nature. But what I try to do is play in such a way that so that if somebody walked in the room, I was in the middle of the solo, and they didn't hear what we call the head, the melody.
Yes,
they would know what song we're playing.
Great.
Get the idea? What it entails is a lot of times, for me anyway, is trying to follow the cadence of the melody. So say there's a song called Salt Creek, and it goes dun 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 dun. Well, so I'll try to follow that stop that's going on there. I might go do 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 do, but that's not the melody.
No.
Yet it follows the cadence of the song,
Mm.
of the melody.
This is,
So
yeah. Look, this is really interesting, and I guess I come from a whole lot of different instruments, but in the wind instrument field, we sort of talk about singing, being able to sing what you want to play in your head,
absolutely,
or preferably with your voice. And then,
right.
are you from that line of thought to that vocal approach to playing?
I teach a lot of workshops and music camps around the world, and that's one thing I always stress is especially when people have a difficult time learning a little passage.
Yeah.
I'll suggest they sing it in their head.
Yes.
Uh, they can sing rhythms, um, like da ba da bum bum. They can
Yes.
sing a rhythm easier than they can play it with their fingers. So
Yes.
if so they do understand it, and the trick would be to just get it out of your head into your fingers. But
Mm.
that's essential is to try to remember, try to vocalize it. You know,
Yes. Now, a song like Limehouse Blues, I think, does have lyrics, but I don't think anyone's ever heard them. And they're from
yeah, I
that
never.
point. No, I wouldn't have a clue what they are. But do you also like the idea, say you were playing, Misty or something, where there are very strong lyrics? Do you also recommend that a musician learns at least a verse and a chorus, or understands what the song's about lyrically? Is that something you recommend?
Absolutely. I mean, and I don't think there's many accomplished musicians that would disagree. Um, what you try to do as a player, especially when you're playing backup behind the vocalist, is you try to support them, number one, but you try to emote the same feelings that they're expressing in the lyrics. So with something sad, you play heartfelt and try to play sad, and if it's funny, you try to be,
Yes.
playing
Yeah.
along with it. And
Yeah.
it's really a conversation. So I guess you could boil all that down to stay in the context of the conversation. If somebody sings, I'm so lonesome, I'm so blue, I don't want to, in terms of conversation, I don't want to go, yeah, but it's sunny in Cleveland.
It's
It makes no sense,
Oh,
right?
I totally agree, and that's something I hear, and our audience will hear a number of tracks with you today, and it's great that we're prefacing your approach to playing. They'll hear it in the way you play, just like you said. If it's a sad song, well, you don't drop out Hot Lick number 37 and go dun, 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 like if it's a very emotional song. But a lot of players do on all instruments. To me, I just switch off when it becomes a finger wiggling exercise. I want to take you right back now. What's your first memory of becoming interested in music? Maybe not the dobro, but go right back. When did you get the music bug? What's your first memory of it?
Well, I think it would have to go back to my father, who worked for the Metropolitan Opera, and he would take us as kids to the opera frequently,
Yeah.
and he would listen to it on the radio, little AM radio back then. He'd listen to it driving us to school, and eventually I got a job down there at the Metropolitan Opera as an usher. So that was a big influence. And then the right about the time I started getting ears for music, the Beatles had hit, and I was attached to a little transistor radio, which don't exist anymore, but
No. Yeah.
I guess they do. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Mm.
But so I was just addicted to the Beatles and to hearing all the other pop stuff that was on the radio, because it was quite a remarkable time. There was this real, as in anything, there was just bubblegum stupid songs, but there was some really good compositions and good tracks that they made.
Yes. And that's an interesting combination, particularly for someone who moved on to focus on the slide dobro. The sounds from that opera start must have been a great broadening experience in your mind to come from that as some of the first live sounds you heard in music.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Beatles, impacted everyone right around the world there. So what was your first instrument? What was the first instrument you actually had?
Bass.
The bass. Okay. Yeah. Electric bass or acoustic bass?
Electric.
Electric bass. And then can you talk us through, because you also play a number of instruments, what was the progression from the bass? What did it move
Uh,
on to?
uh, Bass and I'd play guitar with my friend Mike Lessner, who lived down the street. Uh, and I couldn't do anything. I mean, all I could probably play was the riff to Secret Agent Man.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
So I always kind of played a little guitar. So I guess it would be bass, guitar, banjo. After I heard Earl Scruggs, this goes to kind of a funny story into why I'm playing the dobro.
Yeah.
Uh, I went to an audition in Boston, play bass for a bluegrass band, and I really didn't. I didn't know the bluegrass repertoire, but I could follow things kind of, But on the other hand, I didn't know this and that about it. I just kind of bluffed my way into it, which I've done a lot in my life. So
Yes.
I, the audition didn't go all that well, because when the guy makes a mistake on a bass, there's no recovering from it. You can recover from a mistake on any instrument, but
Yeah.
bass, it's hard. So the audition was over, and being a kid and kind of stupid, I didn't have sense enough to leave. So
Ah.
they didn't know what to do with me. Rather, they didn't,
Yeah.
and they weren't rude enough to say, "Listen, man, take off."
Thanks. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
So they started putting on a couple records, and I think the first or second record they put on was Mike Aldridge's first record, and they put down the needle on a song called Tennessee Stud, and I mean the clouds open up,
Yeah.
and the rest of my life is the rest of my life. It's just from that moment on.
Did you realize at the time that you were listening to the Slide Dobro, or not, when the needle dropped?
Well, you he had a picture of this model guitar about this age.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, I'm aware of. I think I can recall that album cover. Yes, I think I
Yeah,
can.
it was
Yeah.
just the dobro,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
and so I knew what it was, and I guess I put it together from seeing the cover.
Mm.
And it's another interesting story. Um, I listened to that record, I don't know, 10, 20,000 times, and every single time I listened to it, I was looking at that picture on the cover.
Yes.
While you're listening, right?
Mm.
And I lost it after that instrument, and that's something ingrained in me because I have it today. I mean, this 1936 Model 37, same guitar.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. And then I learned to play, and years later, I actually did a record with Hal Rugg and Mike Aldridge.
And we'll talk about that later on. We'll actually play some tracks because I think that's a really it's an important record historically, I think. But we'll get to that. So when
Okay.
you obviously went home and just visualized that, how did the dobro materialize? Did you go and get one straight away?
Let me get to that in a second.
Okay.
Story. So I lost it after this guitar and this beautiful music coming out of this guitar that I saw in the picture, you know.
Yeah.
And years later, I went and did the record with Mike, and we went over to the same photographer who took the picture for the dobro record of Mike Aldridge. And I'm wandering around while they're setting up lights and stuff, and over in the corner I see this wicker basket, and it's got an instrument sticking out of it. And I walked over, picked it up, and it was a dobro.
Right.
And I started looking at it. It was the dobro in the picture on the cover of the record.
Wow.
It wasn't Mike's dobro on the cover.
Ah.
All these years I've been lusting after this instrument, this picture, and the beautiful music I was hearing.
Yes.
And I thought they were one thing.
Is that your current suite of instruments? Or I think you took up pedal steel somewhere along the line, did you?
Yeah. What I've always done is kind of I've always made a living as a musician. So I always, when one opportunity peters out, there would be other opportunities, say, to play the steel guitar.
Yes.
So I would always migrate to where I could make a living.
Yes.
So at a certain point in my life, I moved away from Kentucky and Larry Sparks, and we relocated to New Jersey, and there wasn't any kind of work for a dobro player.
No.
Yet there were country bars, so
yes.
I managed to word my way in, and they paid me to learn it. They didn't know that.
Yes. Look, we'll come back to your learning process. I just want our audience to hear another track of yours, and this is a fantastic track. Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues. I love this track. The first time I ever heard this was on a Charlie McCoy record, an instrumental version of this. And I never actually, whilst I subconsciously thought this must be a vocal tune, my only real memory of Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues was Charlie McCoy's harmonica version. I thought, what a great song. So up it pops on one of your recordings, and what a story. And Dennis Parker, I think, is the vocalist. Is that correct on that? Can you tell us a bit about Dennis? Because that is his rendition of that is just stunning. His storytelling. Tell us a bit about Dennis, if you don't mind.
Well, Dennis is one of the best singers that ever walked the earth, and truly one of the nicest and best friends I've ever had. We worked together with Joe Diffie on the road, and you're confined in this bus, that rolls down the road every day and night. And he was just a wonderful guy to be on the road with, and we'd spend a considerable amount of time just jamming on things. And if you're playing with somebody who sings that well, you can't. There's nothing you can do wrong.
No.
It takes a talent like that to get you to that place, because I could do plenty wrong at every opportunity.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Let's let our audience listen to this. This is just a magic track. So we'll put on Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, featuring Dennis Parker on vocals, and you do some really beautiful, soulful dobro playing.
Thank you.
Everybody's gone away. Said they're moving to LA. There's not a soul I know around. Everybody's leaving town. Some caught a freight, some caught a plane. Find the sunshine, leave the rain. They said this town's a waste of time. I guess they're right, it's wasting mine. Some gotta win, some gotta lose. Good Time Charlie's got the blues. Good Time Charlie's got the blues. My heart keeps telling me you're not a kid at 33. You play around, you lose your wife. You play too long, you lose your life. I got my pills to ease the pain. Can't find a thing to ease the rain. I'd love to try and settle down, but everybody's leaving town. Some gotta win, some gotta lose. Good Time Charlie's got the blues. Good Time Charlie's got the blues. Good Time Charlie's got the blues.
Okay, Jimmy, so what an amazing example there on that track of something we talked about earlier. And that is you listening to the reading of that story by Dennis on vocals and responding really appropriately on the dobro. What's your memory of actually recording that track? That must have been a magic moment.
It really was. We were in a studio in Nashville, and what I did is I want, all these guys are on the clock, and they're like racehorses. If they get stuck standing around for a long time, they lose their energy, So
Yes.
my main focus was to get through the tracks and then worry about the dobro playing later, or worry about this later. Just kind of get all the guys on the record, and then I can overdub
Yes.
later. So that's what we did. And I just, when it went down, I could hear the way. Well, I knew what he was going to do because I played it with him a bunch,
Okay.
And it was just perfect. And there's an unsung guy in there. He's not terribly unsung, but when people listen to that track, one of the things that makes it really special is the guitar playing from Jim Hurst.
From Jim Hurst, is it?
Yeah, Jim Hurst, Hurst.
Oh, it's beautiful guitar playing. I mean, the musicianship on all of your albums is through the roof, but that track, just from the moment it starts, it absolutely captured me. I went through this phase, different phases. The Nashville guys, I've become huge fans of Boots Randolph and Chet Atkins and Charlie McCoy and Lloyd Green and Buddy Emmons. But I also had a simultaneous path where I was getting into jazz. And the reason I mentioned that is I got into Charlie Parker, who was about as far removed from Charlie McCoy as you could imagine, although not really, because all those Nashville guys were great players. But in relation to Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, I always remember reading an article where they were saying that Charlie Parker would be just, playing his fingers off on 52nd Street. But after the gig, he would go to some little cafe or whatever, and there'd be a jukebox in the corner. Charlie would walk over and often put on country and Western music.
Oh,
so he's been playing highest level jazz all night, and his mates, you can just imagine the bass player and the drummer, they're all going out for a drink or a sandwich or something after. And his musicians, mate, always thought that Charlie was having a shot at them. Hang on, of all the tracks, why are you putting on a Hank Williams song or something? And they asked him one, and Charlie said, because I love the stories.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Charlie loved the stories of country and Western music. And I just think anyone who's just heard Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, there's a story. And I can understand, it's just a wonderful way when you think probably the greatest improviser in jazz was genuinely attracted to country and Western music, not because of the chord changes but the stories. And it goes back to what you said, that you all are always looking to be part of a conversation. I think that's a massive takeaway from this discussion.
And like anything you learn, you can't do it at first. You have to keep in your head and in your heart, and you'll get there. But just like driving a car or learning to sign your name, you got to just keep working at it until it happens on its own.
And this is what I want to take you back now to your own development process as a musician. Are you essentially self-taught, would you say, or what? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Totally self-taught. Yeah.
Yeah. There's people who've shown me a thing or two here or there. I mean, as far as the technique and all that stuff, yes, totally self-taught. You have a tremendous amount of fire and drive to accomplish what you want to be able to do. I mean, I really don't know how to do much else besides play. I mean, all the other things that people did in their lives, not all, everything,
no,
lots of things I didn't do because I was so driven to learn music. And it just meant that much to me. I taught my kids how to play guitar here and there, every single one of them at one moment or another, and they took to it like crazy. They played things I couldn't play for a year and a half, 2 years. They could play it in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And yet it didn't mean anything to them. It didn't go there, So that they weren't interested in it and didn't follow up on it. But for me, that was everything. It was like breathing to me,
Yes.
So you just have to be, with that kind of fire and motivation, you know, you, you're gonna practice 8 hours a day.
Yes.
You're gonna be driving along in the car, and somebody could be standing on the side of the road on fire. And if I hear a good lick on the radio, I'm not even gonna know it. I'm just gonna remember that.
That's
You know
right.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. And we'll get to one of the great things about your story is that later in life, you've devoted an enormous amount of energy into your education music website. We'll get to that because you're sharing that knowledge that you've learnt the hard way with anyone who's smart enough to actually want to learn. I think you are doing a fantastic thing there with your website, and I'll put it up on the video so no one's got any doubt.
Appreciate it.
On your website, you've got a great sense of humor, and you talk about the instrument you're holding as the poverty box. and I can relate to what you're saying. It's the, little fish in a big pond or big fish in a little pond. I read an article, it might have been 10 years ago, with Tom Bradshaw, who used to run Steel Guitarist magazine. And they asked Tom, well, how many people, this is about the pedal steel, but how many people do you reckon in the world play the pedal steel? And he said, oh, look, I'll take an educated guess, but he said if there were 50,000, it'd be almost a miracle, And it's interesting because here in Australia, we've got a population of 26 million. I reckon if there were 200 active pedal steel guitarists in Australia, that would be a miracle. What's your thoughts? Are there 10 times as many dobro players maybe as pedal steel players? I'm just trying to get my mind around how big this pool is,
There's less dobro players than pedal steel players, I would say.
Wow, less. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
But it's expanding. Guys like Jerry Douglas and Rob Ikes and Mike Aldridge.
Yes.
Each one of them in their own turn, they just geometrically expanded.
Yes.
The bass. So it's now, back when I started, I don't know if there are 100 dobro players in the whole country.
Yes.
But I teach at this thing called Rezo Summit in Nashville. Rob Ikes puts on, and there's 100 dobro players that come down for that every year.
Yes.
And that, that's got to be one 100th of or 200th of the amount of guys that play this instrument. The thing about the steel is it costs a lot of money to get into it.
Absolutely. And confusing in the variety of tunings and number of strings and pedals and everything. I've got one behind me now, which is a 12 string, and it's universal tuning. And I tuned it to D ninth only because in the early days, it was a suicide mission to play the first Emmons I had just a push-pull Emmons, but that G sharp string being bounced up to G sharp to A hundreds of times, like when it'd go, and I just thought I was a teenager, but I was actually scared of playing it because I was just sort of thinking that it wasn't it was quite a vicious moment when that string would popped. So I just tuned everything down to D ninth, and that's the reason I play D ninth.
Yeah, I get it. Well, I'll tell you, whenever I would get my face close to the strings before I wore glasses, I would close my eyes. Yes, because there's no telling when that G sharp, that 11 is going to break.
And the reason I'm having this discussion is because I just heard a podcast yesterday with the great jazz trumpeter Bobby Shew. And he just mentioned, because he's worked with Yamaha, I think he said for 47 years, and Yamaha make a Bobby Shew model trumpet. He just mentioned in the conversation that Yamaha told him they had sold 700,000 units of his model trumpet. And it just brought it back. I'm driving along thinking 50,000 pedal steel guitarists, trying to get my mind around less or more dobro players. You sort of surprised me and say, well, it's probably less dobro players than pedal steel, versus one brand of one model trumpet having sold 700,000. And get your mind around the guitar equivalent to that. Like every second house in the world has a guitar in it. But what I want to bring that discussion back to is that makes it all the harder to learn an instrument on your own because you've got less materials. Like, did you have many or any books on playing the dobro that you recall were really helpful?
Not that were really helpful. Stacy Phillips, who was a great dobro player, has passed on. He did an instruction book for Oak Publications just called Dobro. And that came out pretty close to the time I started playing. But I really couldn't make heads or tails of it. And it had lots of great pictures of dobro players. So that's essentially what I did, is just
look at
the pictures.
Yes. If I was a kid interested in learning dobro, I'm 100 miles ahead of where you would have been when you first sat with the dobro, scratching your head thinking, how does this work?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of been a mission of mine. I don't know where I got it from, but it's country music and early country music and in bluegrass, we all share everything. I'm going to show you anything you want to know. I'm not going to try to keep it secret because you'll learn it and then I won't be so special.
Yeah. Oh no,
you're shared. So in that spirit, I mean, I've always had that since I started playing this music, and I vividly remember learning and what I didn't know and the questions I had when I learned, because there was nobody to ask.
No.
So that's what I try to bring to each of the lessons. I remember everything that I'm showing somebody, what a technique wise, what a big change it made in my playing.
Oh.
And I think I'd be remiss if I just played the thing and didn't give you the secret to why it works,
Exactly. You're not so much about, look, here's a tab and put the bar on the 4th fret. It's all musical. I mean, I saw your exercise on playing Crazy. And what I loved, you passed a comment somewhere that the chords almost do the work for you. That's such a beautiful song.
Yeah.
And it's not a 1-4-5 chord progression, but again, when you're playing it, it's all about the melody. I want to play a great track of yours now, Pig Dog Boogie. Tell us about that. Is that an original composition or is it an old song?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of based on you were mentioning Charlie Parker, and it certainly isn't Charlie Parker, but
no.
I wanted to write a song kind of like some of the heads that they would play in bebop.
Yes.
Come to find out that the way I hear it now is it sounds like music from 60s cartoons.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they got a lot of that from bebop. I know that, but
yes.
I guess that stuff seeped into my being early on when I was a kid.
Yeah. And what great musicians, like those the musicians who played those soundtracks. Oh, like it's extraordinary music.
Well, for one, the Andy Griffith theme, it's called Fishing Hole. Bum 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 bum. Listen to the guitar playing on that, man. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I just read up something about it. It only took him about 5 minutes to do it. It was so simple for him.
Wow.
Yes.
Let's have a listen to. We'll let our audience listen. We'll come back and talk a bit more about Pig Dog Boogie. Who was on fiddle, the country fiddle on that? Who played that?
Well, the same guy that played mandolin played fiddle, and he is another lifelong friend, Craig Fletcher, one of the most
Oh,
amazing musicians I've ever met in my life.
wonderful player. Yeah.
A true genius, and you he's the kind of guy. He's from Oklahoma, so they're a little bit quiet,
Okay.
So he could be in a session, he'd be playing mandolin, so the producer would say, "Man, that's really good. I think this song needs a fiddle, man. I wish we had a fiddle." And he wouldn't say, "Well, I play fiddle." he just he wouldn't he wouldn't do it. It's just they don't. He doesn't promote himself, and people from Oklahoma, seem to generally be like that. But he is truly one of the best musicians in the world.
That's why I wanted to ask you, because that is, I mean, I heard a lot of Johnny Gimbel and that on the records when I was a kid, getting those Nashville records. I loved the way Johnny played very musically.
Sure.
And this guy was just so, what a wonderful musician and what a wonderful voice on the fiddle. But importantly, from this conversation, what a wonderful job you do of interacting with that player, because a player of that standard would scare 95% of dobro players anywhere in the world. Like, well, what do you do with a player like that? It's like Stefan Grappelli's walked in and you're only used to playing C, F, and G, but you just you interact so beautifully. Do you feel that when you listen back now, and I notice you passed a comment on your website somewhere, that when you listen back to your earliest recordings, you thought they stood up well today, but your tone had improved. Is that what you were saying on your website?
Yeah, well, I mean, everything's improved.
Yeah.
Because I keep trying,
Yes.
But, I didn't know anything about recording or recording a dobro. And usually what you do is, I've come to learn, is you have a microphone and you place it around here. Well, the engineers of that studio never recorded a dobro, and they had no idea. They placed the microphone over the screen holes.
Oh, okay.
Where it sounds like this,
Yes.
So I didn't know any better. I was too wrapped up with trying to get through the songs and play the right thing, and be in tune, and all kinds of things. So I had no idea they were doing that, or shouldn't have.
That's a really interesting point. That what you're saying is that as time has progressed, you've probably took more control over having a bit more say in your sound on the recordings rather than just being the player. Is that correct?
That's correct, totally. And, I've learned about recording, and I'm an engineer, recording engineer.
Yes.
Also. So I've learned a lot about it, and that was just my first foray into it, and it was, looking back, I mean, the mic should have been a different place.
Should have been there.
I remember when I was younger, that I'd position my hand back behind the bridge, and that would be because the strings are tighter and you could play harder and faster.
Yes.
And get cut more, because it's a
it's
bright as opposed to right here where I usually play now.
It's warmer.
So I mean, I spent a long time back there, and then I finally wised up.
And I just want to, it's a good segue into, I like to always ask musicians, how much do you think, you're playing a beautiful dobro there, wow, part of history you've got in your hands, but what do you think of the equipment? How much does the equipment play in the final sound of a musician? Like, could you pick up a relatively inexpensive dobro, and largely to most players' ears or people's ears, that they probably wouldn't hear much difference, that it still sounds like Jimmy Heffernan? Or is the equipment vital to your own individual sound, your choice of equipment?
Yeah, well, I guess one can never really know that, because I hear it with my ears and I hear it with theirs. My ears are going to tell me the instrument was cheap and it's too thin sounding. Whereas somebody else wouldn't be hearing that; they'd be hearing what I'm playing. Yeah, now to your point, I mean, I could pick up a cheap instrument, and inside of a 30, 40 seconds, I figure out what not to do.
Yeah, you would sound like, you would find your voice
Right.
Obviously, we all want to play the best instruments we can for us, but I guess my reason to ask this, I think a lot of people, particularly young people, get caught up in the guitar world, I'm going to go and buy that Stratocaster because then I'll sound like Eric Clapton.
Oh no, that's right. But it is it's a process of elimination. You know, I've done things like that. I mean, not so I sound like Eric Clapton, but
No.
uh, for example, Jerry Douglas was playing an R.Q. Jones, which was the first modern dobro.
Okay.
Past, and I had to have one because you know the sound he was getting was way different than he could get on these kinds of guitars here.
Yes. Yes.
So there's a little bit of just check that off the list.
Do you have multiple dobros, or are you essentially playing that dobro there?
No, I have I think 10 or 12 different ones.
Yeah, for different reasons and different sounds, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're all good in their own respect. I mean it's kind of like sometimes you just feel like dressing up differently, you know.
Yeah.
Play a different instrument and
Yes.
just walk the walk with that one.
Tuning wise, obviously the open G is your default. Do you do the low E, the lower the sixth string down to E, and also the open D tuning? Is that largely your three tunings you use, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've used several over the years. You were mentioning that Rezocasters record with
Yes,
with Howard and Mike Alders. I used a G major 7 tuning on that, and if you know music,
yes,
you're taking a G down to an F, and if you look at the strings below the third string, that'd be a D. Then the third string would then be an F sharp. I mean,
F sharp, yeah.
B, and then D again, so it makes a D6.
Yeah.
Instead of G major 7.
Yes.
So I think we did Roly Poly on that record, and I think I used that tuning.
Use that tuning.
Yeah, that was basically the only time I ever did it because it got me that Western swing feel.
Yes. Okay, I want to talk now because most people read about session musicians, and you spent a fair bit of time, I understand, as a session musician in Nashville. Is that correct? Like,
oh yeah,
yeah. And like for musicians who have never experienced that, can you talk about my experience with Nashville? I just want to briefly say this because I've found as a kid over here in Australia, back in the pre-internet days, no emails, DeWitt Scott in St. Louis, who ran the International Steel thing, I'd write to Scotty and say, I'm a huge fan of Lloyd Green. I'd just like to, I'm 15, by the way, and Lloyd's in the height of his Monument record releases and playing with Paul McCartney and hello, you know, probably the number one steel player in the world from a commercial point of view. And I'm naive enough to say to Scotty, I'd just like to write a letter to Lloyd and thank him for, I'm a fan. Scotty writes me back, here's Lloyd's home address.
Exactly.
I write Lloyd Green a letter asking, like as a kid, asking way too many questions. About a month later, Lloyd, I've got it still, a beautiful handwritten letter, and he politely answers every single question I asked. Signs it, your friend Lloyd Green. I thought, like, can you get your mind around that? Is so different. If I wanted to write to George Benson, can you imagine the chance that you would ever get to George Benson's hands, all the gatekeepers? And I found Nashville amazing in that era because I'd say to Lloyd, I love the way Charlie McCoy played on such and such a record. And Lloyd would just say, by the way, if you want to get in touch with Charlie, here's Charlie's address. Yeah. I'd say to Charlie, I love Boots Randolph's playing. His Boots. I, at one stage, had an address book of all of my heroes, and they were all such beautiful people that they would respond to you.
Yeah.
Was that in Nashville? Did you feel that in your time in Nashville, or was it a cutthroat, competitive business world? What was the feeling when you were there?
Well, first of all, what you described about the accessibility of Lloyd Green or Charlie McCoy or whoever, that goes back to what I was talking about in country music. In the old days, you did shows and you were like neighbors to the people that came to see you, and you treated them neighborly, right? I mean, you didn't hide in the bus or hide in the dressing room. No. If someone approached you, you spent a good amount of time with them and answered all their questions. And I did write a letter to Mike Aldridge when I was a kid, and he did write me back same way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it goes back to that. As far as Nashville being cutthroat, not at all. I mean, of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but I always found everybody extremely helpful,
Right.
extremely giving. I could ask most guys to, show me how you did that, and they would drop what they're doing. They'd sit down and they show it to me.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's
Fantastic.
a wonderful place, man. Everybody helps each other down there, and
Yeah.
I'm sure there's cutthroatery going on. And
Yeah.
I know a few people probably that
Yeah.
don't subscribe to what I just mentioned, but
Yeah. But in general, because
General.
I have amazing fondness, and I still to this day, I'm often with what I do on YouTube, and that, someone will send me an email. I always think of those guys. I always reply to every email and answer the question, because I thought if it was good enough for Lloyd, Boots, and Charlie McCoy, it's good enough for me. Till the day I die, it's good enough for me.
I'm totally the same way. I mean, people write me all the time, ask me all kinds of questions. Once in a while, I might not be able to answer it because it's going to take too much time, and then I lose it.
Yes.
And I feel horrible. I feel absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
But, in general, I try to give people as much time as I can.
As far as reading music goes, do you read conventional music notation, or is that really not part of what your life's been?
Well, it's not done basically in Nashville. Everything's written out on number charts.
Number charts, yeah. You also are a producer. You've spent some time producing. Talk a little bit about that, because people hear the term producer. What's your take on the role of a producer?
Well, I guess you could call it kind of like a director of a movie. Producer, the first thing a producer does is get the right guys in the room for what you're going to do or want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And that includes, sometimes you might be working with somebody that doesn't have any experience in Nashville, and they're scared to death. And you want to surround that person, that artist, with people that are not only really good at what they do, that kind of goes without saying, but warm and fuzzy, so they don't put people off. So things like that, like a director of a movie will pick the stars and know this guy works well with this guy, and all those kinds of things go into it. And to be honest, when you're working with musicians of the caliber that are in Nashville and the people I would know and call, you don't have to tell them anything. No. It's not like, it's not like, well, I hear this lick right here. Go do.
Oh no!
You don't have to do any of that.
No.
And I've always told people when they say, well, I'm not, because I'd be in sessions and then somebody would come in and they do that. They say, well, right here, I'm really hearing this do. And to my mind, if somebody has something in their head like that, it means that every time I go to that section and play something different, they're not hearing what I'm doing.
No.
They're hearing what I'm not doing. Right?
Yes, I agree.
So, I kind of, if the situation is friendly enough, I'll always tell them that, you ought to listen to what I'm doing before you tell me not to do it.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful, I just want to mention on YouTube now, there's some extended interviews with Lloyd Green, because Lloyd's in his 80s now and retired, but he tells a story that he knew it was time for him to retire when he turned up to a session in Nashville, and there was a young kid producer, and he heard through the headphones, Mr. Steel player, I want you to play not like a steel. I want you to don't play like a and Lloyd just said, well, Mr. Producer, will you let me play what I hear first and then make it? Said, no, I don't want. And apparently Lloyd just stood up, didn't sign the paper, just walked out. Thanks. Knew it was time, that his time had come. And I sort of think, what you just said.
Yeah.
That's the opposite for a producer. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's also a little funny thing that you just glanced over there, is when they get on the intercom and say, I'm Lloyd Green, right?
Yes.
When they get on the intercom and they say, Mr. Steel player.
Yeah.
Right. They need to know that's Lloyd friggin' Green.
Exactly.
That knows what's going to happen right there.
Exactly. And Lloyd just said he knew it was his time to go. And that was more or less it. You mentioned right at the start the influence of the Beatles, and look, I'm not too sure that there's ever been any better melody writers than Paul
Yeah.
McCartney and John Lennon. I want to play. I was really surprised to hear you play "In My Life" on one of your albums, the Beatles
Oh,
song "In My Life" on Dobro, because I thought when I saw the title, I thought again, wow, this is a beautiful song. It takes courage to play that song on the Slide Dobro, because it's not, again, get your 100 Dobro players. It's probably not a song the average Dobro player is going to
yeah.
pick. And you play it, I keep coming back to it. You are more than prepared to treat the Dobro as a single note instrument and embellish that single note melody. And you're one of the few that do. You are to be really commended to that, because the average Dobro player would try to Dobro eyes "In My Life" and end up
Yeah.
with a disaster. We would end up with the hillbilly version of "In My Life." I'd like our audience to listen to this. This is a beautiful rendition of a beautiful song from the Beatles. So I want to play the song Blue Yodel number 6. Now, this has got another very powerful vocalist. Can you tell me who that is and a little bit about the singer on this track?
Yeah. His name is Jim Mitchell. He actually has a local band here that travels and does shows out of state, but he lives right in the area here, and I've done gigs with him, and he would, unlike any band around here, in the middle of doing what he regularly does, which is kind of a country rock thing, he would pull out a Jimmy Rogers song right in the middle of it in a bar room,
Okay.
and I got a bucket of flour, Lord, I got a bucket of Lord.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's a song from the 20s,
Yeah.
and so he always impressed me with that, and I always thought he had a really good feel for that kind of music, and truly he loves it. He loves Jimmy Martin, he loves Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams. He's got a band called Jim. Just to give him a little plug here. It's Jim
Yes.
Mitchell and the Repeat Offenders, and they've got several records out.
Good name. Good name for the band. Yeah. And what's your memory of this particular track? Again, was the vocals done first and then you interacted, or was it done as a everyone playing at once type recording?
I think with the exception of the drums and the upright bass, I believe I played everything on it.
in interacting in time with the singer.
Yeah, but the way we would do it is I kind of laid down a bed first,
Yes.
the guitar, and then we had the bass on there, and then Jim went in and sang the vocal, and then I came in later and reacted to what he was singing.
Yeah, you're producing it as well, are you?
Yeah, and then Jim had input, but I guess if, maybe Jim and I did it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I forget.
yeah. Okay, let's have a listen to Blue Yodel number 6.
One of these mornings, I'm sure gonna leave this town. One of these mornings, I'm sure gonna leave this town. 'Cause a trifling woman sure keeps a good man down. Yeah, she left me this morning. Midnight was turning day. Yeah, she left me this morning. Midnight was turning day. I didn't have no blues until my good gal went away. I got the blues like a midnight moon shining bright as day. I got the blues like a midnight moon shining bright as day. I wish a tornado would blow my blues away.
Okay, Jimmy, well, we're coming down the home straight. I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about your music education website and also any other projects you're currently working on, stuff you've got in the oven. If people want to connect with you and your tuition, what's the best way for them to learn dobro from you?
Oh, well, I teach over Zoom and Skype all over the world. I've frequently taught people down there in Australia. And then, aside from that, I've got a website, jimmyheffernan.com, and I sell dobro supplies. And the main focus of the website is teaching videos, where I take a song, play it, and then I break it down piece by piece, because people don't know it, but you don't start a song and end it in one thought. It's a million little thoughts, right?
Yes.
So I break all those down and show you how to understand how to play it. And then you get not only get the tablature, but you get the backing track. And a lot of times I'll give it two versions of slow tracks while you're learning it and putting it together. You don't have to worry about the tempo.
Yes.
And then one to to play when you get good at it. So and once again, I mentioned it earlier, but I try to give people insights through the videos of things that changed my life musically. And how important a little thing like just using your middle and your thumb together like that.
It's life changing.
It's the even worst thing on the dobro. I don't you've probably gotten this on the dobro, but a lot of people start out and their inclinations, any inclination they have about playing this instrument is totally wrong. And how do I know it's wrong? Because I did it wrong.
Yes.
Everything from putting your picks on backwards to everything, right?
Yes.
So I remember all that, and I try to shortcut by showing people the technique involved.
I highly recommend. It's funny you just mentioned about people putting picks on back to front. I've had students here walk in, with that and trying to convince them that it's not a good idea, and they've been doing it for 12 months is not an easy thing. For one of the instruments I play is the flute. My first ever flute book, the person playing the flute on the cover, the photo was the reverse negative. So normally you hold the flute over to your right.
Yeah,
The very first thing I saw of a flute player was this. So guess how I started trying to play the flute and thinking, this has got to be the most goddamn hardest instrument in the world. Yeah. And one day a person kindly said to me locally, Brian, you got the flute the wrong way around. And I'm pointing to the Art of Flute Playing book. It's interesting, isn't it? And it's so powerful what you are doing. If someone wants to learn the slide dobro, I just encourage them to go to your site, because you've spent your life playing that instrument. Everyone learns in a different way, but I think that the care and time you take in your videos sort of caters for a broad brush of different people's learning styles. Have you found that people say to you, yeah, hey, I got that, I'm digging your videos?
Yeah, and I got to tell you, man, that I guess you asked what motivates me at some point to do this.
Yes.
And it's the biggest kick to see somebody get something and have that light bulb go on.
Oh, yeah.
They smile ear to ear,
yeah,
and they go, "Oh my God, I've been struggling trying to do that forever. I didn't know you do this, and all of a sudden, and they get it." And I mean, that's worth $1 million. I started playing guitar when I was about 17.
Okay. So if you could go back in time, in a time machine, and have a conversation with your 17-year-old self,
yeah,
what advice would you give that young Jimmy about music? From everything you've learned and every experience you've had, if you could go back and talk to that younger version of yourself, what do you think you'd say, your advice on music?
That's a great question, man. The thing that's popping in my head is the 3 T's. And I think that would have helped me immeasurably. And the 3 T's are tone, tone, and tone.
Yes. Sound. Yeah, sound.
Because the tone is number one. If you play something that's very, very simple and it sounds good, you're way ahead,
Yeah.
And I didn't know that when I was a kid. I thought, well, and then maybe worry about the tone later,
Yeah.
But in fact, I could have got, with good tone, I could have gone, and it would have been beautiful, even though I wasn't going,
And people will respond to a good sound, won't they? A good tone.
They will.
Yeah. That's great advice, mate. I want to go out now, finish the interview with a track called Rock Bottom, which is from your album that you did with Hal Rugg, Mike Aldrich. Take your time and tell us about, like we've lost both Hal and Mike. Tell us about those guys, what they meant to you, and how that record came about. It's just, I think everyone who's interested in slide instruments should get a copy of that album. I just think it's historic.
I agree.
Yeah. Tell us about it, mate. Tell us about those guys. The floor's yours.
Okay. Actually, the floor is mine.
Yes.
Mike and I were very good friends because when I relocated from Kentucky to New Jersey, my ex-wife wanted to live here, so Mike was only a couple hours away in D.C. So I liked Mike, and Mike liked me, and we both interested in the same thing: pedal steels and dobros, and so I'd go down there constantly, and we would work out little things, just playing around, little harmony parts and different songs and stuff, and it kind of grew to where we could do this as a record. I mean, it's not really done, 2 dobro players,
Yeah.
So we went down and started to cut it, and I was always a big fan of something called a pedabro, which you probably know what it is.
Yes. But just describe that. Yeah, describe it for the audience.
It's a pedal steel in a D9 tuning. That it has a dobro resonator, so it has 10 strings and pedals and knee levers, and sits like this, and you push the pedals up and down, just like a pedal steel.
Yeah.
Except that it's got a cone and a cover plate, and so it's got a very, very unique sound. Paul Franklin just murders it.
Yes.
And I've been a real huge fan of Hal Rugg from the days when he played with Loretta Lynn.
Yeah.
And the Osborne brothers and the Wilburn brothers. And I always thought that Hal Rugg had the most unique and interesting approach to E9 playing, commercial E9 playing.
Yes.
Just real honky tonk and real interesting and harmonically complex and yet sometimes just beautifully simple. And I was always a big fan of his, and Mike was too. So we're going to have a pedibro because it's an acoustic instrument. It's like a dobro.
Yes.
We're going to have it on one track, and I forget which one it was, but he went in and overdubbed it, and he comes into the control room, and Mike and I are both just like looking at each other, and we knew what we were going to say. It's like, Hal, would you please be on this record with us?
Yeah.
So that's how Hal got involved in it, and
okay.
And we just had the best time, man. Stayed over at Hal's house and sat around drinking beer. And I actually had gotten copies of, and Hal was a great friend. I got copies of a lot of the old records he played on that he didn't have anymore. So we sat up at night and listening to those.
Yeah.
A couple beers. It's it's stuff you wouldn't take in any amount of money for.
Oh, look, the track I've chosen, I could have played any track on that album, but I've chosen Rock Bottom because it's right there. It's lively, and I think it is Mike Aldrich that kicks off on the dobro, and then you follow him. Hal is very obvious when he comes in. But it's interesting that you and Mike have your own sound. You can tell who's playing, and you've got your own style, but they're very compatible styles. But it's like the three voices on this track, Mike, Jimmy, and Hal. It's a beautiful track, Rock Bottom. Mate, I just want to thank you for taking time today. You are a real inspiration, I think. The great Doc Severinsen, one of my favourite musicians, he's still alive today. Doc, in his 90s. He said in a recent interview, and it's a wonderful quote, that if you get good at something, really good at something, you must pass it on. It's not optional.
Right.
And Doc's still, going to universities at 94 and talking about the trumpeter music. You are a classic example of that. You've got really good playing the slide dobro, and you are passing it on. So congratulations with all you're doing. I really suggest to the audience, if they've enjoyed this conversation, reach out, drop you an email, go to your site, check out more of what you're doing, buy some of your albums.
Yeah.
Buy some of your albums, because that's one of the things I love about this podcast. It's a chance. I'm absolutely convinced that when people see this podcast episode, many of them will have never heard Slide Dobro, and every track we've played today, I'm just thinking, is largely acoustic instruments. I think, you think about it, just about all your music features acoustic instruments right up front and center, and how rare that is nowadays. How beautiful to hear mandolins and fiddles and slide dobros and acoustic guitars and acoustic bass and that.
I love it. It's so of the earth,
Yeah. So thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, mate.
Okay.
I appreciate it. You're a great interviewer.
What an honour it was to share an hour or so with one of the modern day masters of this beautiful instrument, the Slide Dobro. As always, with all of my guests, I invited Jimmy to record anything he wanted to as a collaboration between the host and guest for this podcast episode. Jimmy sent me over a beautiful Dobro track of him playing Carter's Blues, a song written by the Carter family, one of the pioneering families of traditional American country music. Here's our version with Jimmy on the Slide Dobro and me playing the 12-string pedal steel guitar. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and got a lot out of it, as I certainly have. Bye for now.